There's always a moment where you're like, no, that is too much. But, I like to push things till they're almost ugly. Hi, I'm Emerald Fennell. I'm the writer-director of Wuthering Heights, and this is How I Made It for V&A Up Next. Well, I first read the book when I was 14, and I think, like everyone of that age, I was slightly reluctant about books on the curriculum because they always seem like homework, and it just completely cracked me open. It was just the most thrilling experience. It's the most transcendently beautiful book. Because of the time that I read it in my life and the nature of the book, which is so visceral, I've sort of never really stopped thinking about it. And so then looking at turning it into a film, I wanted to reflect that first experience as best as I could. And it is a kind of sensory experience and a physical one. I think that's what Bronte is so incredible at. She gets inside you. I collect hundreds and hundreds of images, materials, take photographs, and it can be from anything and anywhere. And so actually one of the first places I came was here at the V&A because the only copy of Balthus's illustrations of Wuthering Heights are here. And it was so important looking at those because his very kind of troubling work sits very squarely in this Bronte world, and the blocking, the kind of characters, the tension between them. What's important to me is building a world, building an imaginative world, and the Gothic is pathetic fallacy, which doesn't just extend to the weather, but everything. Everything they touch, everything they wear, everything they see, everywhere they go is a sort of reflection of their emotional landscape. And then, it's all sorts of things. It can be anything. It can be a painting. There are lots of paintings here that have incredible fabric, incredible jewellery. I looked a lot at the silverware, looking at shape, looking at brutalism as much as we look at places of the period, looking at the mines and the kind of industrial revolution that was happening there, looking at textiles, fabric. In our version, Edgar Linton is an extraordinarily rich textiles manufacturer. And so it was sort of looking always at textiles that are slightly out of their time, to have that slight feeling of he's sort of bringing the future into this sort of ancient world. There are a lot of disembodied hands in Victorian times, and so that we have lots of them in Wuthering Heights in the set. It felt really kind of Victorian to me to have hands without touch, that they were just sort of robotic instruments and they're kind of taken away from their main purpose. But it can really be anything, and I'm really obsessed with the Victorian preoccupation with containing the natural. So there's a lot of taxidermy in the film, flower pressing and hair work. So I looked a lot at kind of the sort of hair work that people made. And what's so lovely about those sorts of crafts is they tend to be female. So looking at a lot of sort of female crafts. But what we made for the title sequence, which was stop motion animated and took 9 days to shoot, is a hair work title sequence. And it's blonde hair and brunette hair, and it's Cathy and Heathcliff sort of intertwining. And yeah, we use some of Jacob and Margot's natural hair in that. But it's that kind of manic attention to detail that I think you need. And it's why the V&A is so special, because I think you really feel it. There's nothing here that's not personal or sort of to some degree domestic and emotional. Well, I think firstly I'm just so lucky to work with just the best people in the world, not just because they're immensely talented, but they're also just wonderful. And I think what that does is if you all trust each other and you're very generous towards each other and you're working in a truly collaborative way, like I'm able to do with Susie Davis, Jacqueline Duran and Lena Sangren and everyone really on this, it means you can sort of take risks. And not in the sort of way that I think people maybe think it might be, where you're making sort of provocative filmmaking, but it's more about risks of taste. There's so much restraint now in design and art and emotion, actually. And so all of us having the permission to go far, to be a little bit more rococo, to sometimes be garish, I like to push things till they're almost ugly. That's interesting to me, and that's a big thing to ask, not just the performers, but the craftspeople who work on this. I want to make sure they always feel like they're in a safe place to suggest something wild or hideous and know it's going to be kind of welcomed. You always have to go too far to then pull yourself back. So there's always a moment where you're like, no, that is too much. You know, it's a very like sensory thing making a film. And so for us, it's really about how do we feel? How do we want this to make us feel? What does this fabric kind of communicate to the person who's wearing it and then to the people watching? And Jacqueline's just incredible in that way. She finds the most extraordinary things. The pleasure that she finds in the detail is so wonderful. And Jacqueline made just the maids at Thrushcross Grange, their little aprons are held up with stump work hands. It's about care and attention to detail, and it's about interrogating every single decision that you make. There are so many different conversations with so many different unbelievably gifted craftspeople. And you know, this film has 700 people making every single thing from scratch. And if you love craft and you like looking at artists, it is a work of art. You know, we also invited Nicola Turner and Anne Carrington, and they kind of came in and sort of contributed some of their sculptures. It's very female and very visceral, and it's a literal world. What I love, you know, for example, about this Thrushcross Grange set, which is sort of Cathy's bedroom, is that her husband has made a room out of her skin. And so it was finding a way of making it at first glance look completely ordinary, just like a sort of peach pink room of a sort of like pseudo-Victorian nature. And it's only when you get closer that you see that it has veins and freckles and it's padded and sort of made of latex and pressing out of the wood panelling, kind of bulging a little. We got Margot to photograph her skin on her arms, photographs of her veins and her freckles, and then we blew it up to these sort of like panel-sized proportions, and then we looked at different textures, different padding. So it's padded with a sort of silk polyester printing of her skin, and then it's thin layer of latex over the top. So we can interact with it. And then some of the molds had little hairs coming out of them. The carpet also has veins coming in. And the trim of all of the curtains and the canopy bed are blonde hair plaited. It's metaphorical in its like nature and its emotion, but we actually made it. It existed, and I think that's a really important like tension. I think honestly, the detail, just the detail, because thinking is free. So whether you've written your own script or you're looking at somebody else's or you're, you know, considering any kind of like visual art, like how to make every tiny thing, whether it's like your signature or whether it's the underside of something that nobody might look at, you know, that everything itself is considered and detailed, and I think people just respond to that always. They respond to your attention and care, and that's the same in life as it is in art.